Well, welcome back, members and new officials. We will now consider the 2024-25 estimates for Vote 152, Sask Power Corporation, Lone Subvote PW01. Minister Duncan is here with us officials. I will remind officials to identify themselves before they speak and not to touch the microphones. The hazard operator will turn them on for you. Today we have Lena Young, who will be substituting in for Doyle Vermette. And Minister Duncan, please make your opening comments and introduce your officials.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening to you and to committee members. I'll begin by introducing my officials. To my left is Rupen Pandya, President and CEO of Sask Power. To my right is Troy King, Executive Vice President, Chief Strategy, Technology, and Financial Officer. Seated behind us, Rochelle Verrey-Morphy is Executive Vice President, Legal and Corporate Services and General Counsel. Rhea Brown is Executive Vice President of Customer Experience and Procurement. And David Keoghan, my Chief of Staff, is joining us as well. We are pleased to be here today to discuss consideration of estimates for Sask Power for the 24-25 fiscal year. Sask Power is responsible for serving more than 550,000 customers' accounts within Saskatchewan. We maintain more than 160,000 circuit kilometers of power lines, 59 high-voltage switching stations, and 200 distribution substations. Our vast area and relatively low population means that about 3 customer accounts are served per circuit kilometer, a low customer density compared to other jurisdictions. Sask Power's total available generation capacity, including purchase power, is 5,353 megawatts, and demand for power continues to grow, with a new record summer peak load of 3,669 megawatts being set during a heat wave this past summer. Here on the prairies, we tend to see the highest peak loads when it's very cold and very hot. When Alberta was experiencing an energy shortage this past January, we were able to supply them with 153 megawatts of surplus power to help them minimize the impacts to the residents. In 24-25, Sask Power plans to spend $1.6 billion to modernize, grow, and sustain our provincial electricity system so that it can continue to provide reliable and affordable power. This represents an increase of $450 million compared to the previous fiscal year and will help the company to meet the growing demand for reliable power while making strides towards a decarbonized electricity grid. Planned capital expenditures for this year include $596 million to maintain and upgrade existing transmission, distribution, and generation assets, $480 million in transmission and distribution growth investments and customer connects, $553 million on new generation, including $417 million on Aspen Power Station and $115 million on Ermine and Yellowhead expansions. And Sask Power will commission the Great Plains Power Station near Moose Jaw later this year. An additional $129 million in strategic investments will allow Sask Power to continue with the smart meter deployment and continue work on projects such as the Regina Operations Maintenance Complex. These are just some of the highlights of Sask Power's capital investment in the province to continue to ensure that Saskatchewan has reliable, cost-effective, and sustainable electricity this year and in the years to come. As we look to the future, our investments will continue to be focused on strengthening our electricity system and moving to lower carbon generation options. Sask Power plans to add up to 3,000 megawatts of wind and solar generation by 2035 and is currently in the process of adding 700 megawatts of wind and solar power in south central Saskatchewan by 2027. This includes the 100 megawatt Ihuana solar project, which will begin construction in the Estevan area this year. Sask Power also continues to work towards a decision on SMR development in Saskatchewan. Sask Power continues extensive engagement with the public and plans to narrow the list of potential sites to host Saskatchewan's first SMR in the coming months. Following detailed analysis of those sites, they anticipate selecting a final site in early 2025. Also in early 2025, Sask Power plans to submit its initial project description to the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada to initiate the formal impact assessment process, a requirement to apply for the necessary federal licenses to build and operate a nuclear facility. Sask Power will continue to work with experienced partners in the nuclear sector and work to build new relationships with expertise in the industry. Earlier this year, in response to the federal government's decision to remove the carbon tax from home heating oil for Atlantic Canadian families, our government also took the step of removing the federal carbon tax from natural gas and electric heat to ensure fairness for Saskatchewan families. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening comments, and with that, we would be pleased to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I'll remind committee members we're scheduled for 3 hours tonight till 9:30 p.m. If any members need a break or anything, just please get the attention of the chair. Ms. Young, the floor is yours for questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for those opening comments. And as always, thank you to the SaskPower officials for being here tonight and for all the work that you do, both in preparing for this stupendous evening that we have ahead of ourselves, as well as the work that you do each and every day on behalf of the province of Saskatchewan and the good people at my favorite crown. I have a couple high-level questions, financial questions, Mr. King, that I'm going to start off with. If these numbers aren't readily available, I am happy to receive them at a later date, which I'll canvass through the chair when might be an appropriate timeline if they're not available. So for 24-25, are you able to advise me of each of the following budget numbers? Total revenues, total expenses, net income or losses, net cash from operations, return on equity, total net debt ratio, or pardon me, total net debt and percent debt ratio.
For the question, Ms. Young, I have a series of numbers here for you. Total revenue for 24-25 is anticipated to be $3.378 billion. Expenses, $3.186 billion, for a net income of $191.5 million. Net cash is $890.5 million. Net debt is $9.045 billion, and the debt to equity ratio is 75.1%.
Much in the ROE.
$6.6%.
Thank you very much, Minister. And what's the long-term ROE target for SaskPower?
The long-term range is between 6 and 8.5.
Perfect. And forgive me, is the use of a range, is that a new development? I remember it used to be 8.5, but is that my misunderstanding? Has it always been a range?
Yeah, the range has been new in the last year.
Okay. Perfect. And so for that 6 to 8.5% range that's now being projected, forgive me, I know I asked the question and I specified long-term. What's that projected out for the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's a part of our 5-year plan.
Thank you. What is the estimated year-end OM&A for 23-24 and projected for 24-25?
For 23-24, $807.6 million, and for 24-25, we're forecasting $847.2 million.
And sorry, that first year, Minister, was 876?
Sorry, 807.6. 807.6,
thank you.
sorry.
Perfect. So I note that's up significantly from the former projections of $765 million for 23-24. That was included in the last rate application. What does that increase? What's that attributable to? most mutually accessible airport was Vegas, but we're old ladies and did not want to do Vegas again, so we drove to Utah and went hiking. Saw the sights. It's very quiet.
Troy King, Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy, Technology, and Financial Officer. So the number or the comparison that you're looking for, I don't have that data with me. So the rate application would have been 2 years ago. I have it just to our latest budget that we have. So our budget was $796 million, and now we're forecasting that $807.7 million. Would you like me just to walk through the components of it?
Just high level.
High level?
Yeah.
Okay, so on wages and salaries, on a gross basis, it's $505 million, up $4.5 million, about 0.9% from budget. On our external services, they are actually down at $270.8 million. They're down $9 million, or about 3.3% from the prior year. Materials and supplies of $58.9 million are up $1.5 million, or 2.6%. Just go right there. What we call our other expenses, which include training, administrative, travel, bad debt, tools and equipment, vehicles, property expenses. We total them up they come to $99.8 million, up about $13.6 million, or 15.8% from the prior year. And then we have what we call our corporate credits. So these are the expenses, mainly wage and salaries, that get charged to capital. So I gave you gross numbers. So we applied about $105.8 million to capital, which is an increase of $2.7 million from budget. And then overall, we had grants of $20.6 million compared to $24 million in the budget. So the total is 807.7 again versus 796.5, an increase of 1.4% from budget.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any rate increases assumed for 24-25 that will need to be submitted to and approved by the rate review panel?
No, the answer to that would be no.
So what are the latest projections by SaskPower with respect to the annual rate increases that will be required over the next 4 years in order for SaskPower to hit its long-term ROE target?
Thanks for the question. So as a part of a planning assumption that SAS Power goes through in building out the plans over the next number of years, and in part because of the application of the Clean Electricity Grant that is in this budget, what we're basing assumptions on is essentially rate increases over the next several years, either at or below the rate of inflation. Now, again, that's planning assumptions, taking into account a number of factors, but that's what we would be looking at. It would be rate increases at or below the rate of inflation.
Thank you very much. And what's the rate of inflation being estimated by SAS Power for each of the next 5 years?
%3.
Thank you. I just want to test maybe one assumption that I'm making with yourself and officials. Am I right in assuming that increases tied to the OBPS or to the federal carbon tax won't necessarily manifest in rate increases, but will just flow through the price of electricity?
Yes, yes, because they're treated separately.
Great, thank you. So hearing what you've said of a rate of inflation of around 2 to 3%, and looking at SAS Power's document, supply planning overview, the presentation that they've been, good people have been doing with the outreach and engagement work that is underway. Every scenario contemplated in this document projects an annual rate increase of at least 2.5%, which seems to be in line with that 2 to 3%. So if this is needed for SAS Power's planning, can you speak to why there is no rate increase last year or this year?
So there were increases in September of 2022 and April 1st of 2023. Both of those were of 4%. So last year there was a rate increase. We're not requesting approval from the rate review panel to consider a rate increase for this year, in large part because of the Clean Electricity Grant. SAS Power, with those dollars, will be able to hit its rate of return, incorporating those dollars into the plan for this upcoming year. So we're not seeking a rate increase for this year.
Thank you. So then hearing that, as we look out, having had no increase for this year or next year, heading into then I suppose it would be 25, 26. Could the committee assume that there would be a rate increase or an application to the rate review panel for an increase of at least 7.5%?
So again, that's a planning assumption. There has been no decision made in terms of a rate application. And so, no, I think the basis of your question, the assumption is wrong. Whatever rate increases that, when the next rate increase would be applied for, would be between that rate of inflation, that 2 to 3% that we've already discussed.
And so there'd be no necessity to make up, theoretically, the 2 to 3 years that the utility would have forgone that.
That's correct.
So SaskPower is planning and is confident in its ability to hit its financial targets with no rate increases going forward for at least the next 3 years. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, just to be clear, for 24-25, no rate increase. After that, what we would be looking at for a subsequent rate increase would be somewhere in that rate of inflation range.
Thanks. So can you just help me square how the annualized increases that SaskPower will need in order to do its supply planning, build out additional generating capacity, routine maintenance, all of that. There is no ongoing annualized increases that are going into SaskPower's planning. It's just that inflationary 2 to 3%. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the Clean Electricity Transition Grant, that's this year, I believe 140 million approximately. So that the intent of that is to help mitigate essentially rate increases as much as possible to address affordability issues, keeping rates affordable for residential and our other customers, and so that will help to mitigate having to have otherwise sooner and higher rate applications into the future. So we're still targeting beyond that 140 million that has been applied as a grant for this year, beyond 24-25, going forward at some point eventually with a rate increase, but in that 2 to 3% range, in line with what we're projecting inflation to be.
So what does that 2 to 3% inflationary range, like pick your number there, and represent in terms of dollars? If you're saying this year the $140 million for the Clean Electricity Grant is sufficient to protect customers of all classes at SaskPower from any kind of rate increases, looking out, is it safe to assume $140 million is what SaskPower would effectively net from is that what you're saying, from a 2% rate increase?
Of the percentage increase, each 1% increase in our rates is worth roughly $30 million. So at 2 to 3%, we are getting between $60 and $90 million per year. And that's the requirement go forward after netting the impact of the financial benefit of the transfer.
Thank you. Maybe let's talk a little bit more about the Clean Electricity Grant and the OBPS, if that's okay. So maybe some basic questions to start off. How much has been collected from SaskPower with respect to the OBPS for 22, 23, 23, 24, and then what's projected for 24, 25? Ask you for the breakdown of that between the grant and the SMR fund.
Rupen Pandya, President and CEO. Good evening, everyone. So prior to, up to including 2022, all carbon tax proceeds were collected by the federal government. So moving into fiscal 23-24, there's $326 million collected. And that's itemized in the budget document as return solely for the purposes of an SMR investment fund. And in 24-25, the forecast is $280 million, of which half, $140 million, is coming back to the utility as the Clean Electricity Transition Grant, and the remaining $140 million is being invested in the small modular reactor investment fund.
Thank you. And sorry, do you have that for 25-26 projected as well?
Yes. So for 25-26, our forecast is $337 million in total, and then half of that would return to the utility as Clean Electricity Transition Grant.
Thank you. And prior to 2022, of course, there was the federal OBPS, which the provincial system has replaced. I know we went back and forth on this a lot last year. So perhaps remind me the value of the funds that were still, I don't know what the right term is, but like outstanding still with Ottawa, and where's that money at, and was that agreement ever executed to return those dollars to Saskatchewan, and if yes, when?
Thank you for the question, member. So I'll start with the total outstanding from that has been collected between 2019 and 2022, and that is $496.1 million. In agreement with the Government of Canada, those funds will be recycled back to the utility, including 22, 23, 23, 24, and I include those years even though the dollars haven't flown because they're included in our agreement with the Government of Canada, all the way out to 2029, and I'll get into detail on how those dollars will flow back. They'll flow back principally through 8 different categories of investment. The first is SMR development costs. The second is rural rebuilds and improvements. And I should have prefaced, member, that these are all negotiated with the Government of Canada through Environment and Climate Change Canada to make sure that these dollars are being reinvested in electricity transition. The third area is advanced metering infrastructure. So this is AMI deployment. Fourth is hydro life extensions at EB Campbell's units 1 through 6. The fifth is demand-side management or demand response programming. The sixth is rural underground mitigation. This is us essentially rejuvenating rural underground transmission. Seventh is battery storage projects. And the eighth is international power line, Southwest Power Pool line. So in 22-23, we're forecasting $7.1 million will flow back as capital. So that's the first year of the proposed agreement. In 23-24, we'll see $44 million come back as capital across those 8 different categories and $3.3 million in operating for a total of $47.8 million. In 24-25, we'll see $78.1 million come back as capital across those 8 categories and $9.8 million in operating for a total of $87.9 million. In 25-26, we'll see $112.6 million come back as capital and $22.9 million in operating for a total of $135.5 million. In 26-27, we'll see $137.4 million come back as capital and $18.5 million in operating for a total of $155.9 million. In 27-28, we'll see $26.9 million come back as capital and $18.3 million come back as operating for a total of $45.2 million. And then in 28-29, we'll see $16.8 million come back as operating for a total of $16.8 million, which will then, over the course of those 7 years, will be $406.6 million for capital, $89.5 million for operating for the total $496.1 million.
Thank you, and I, based on your comments, understand that that agreement is still not finalized.
Just a correction. So the agreement is finalized. We're just waiting for the dollars to flow. They haven't actually flowed for the previous fiscal years that I identified. Yeah. Okay.
How much on an incremental basis did the January 1st, 2024 OBPS carbon tax increase cost SaskPower for the fiscal year 2024-25 and the following 4 years?
January 1st, 2024 was 0.5% or 0.5%. And that equates to roughly $15 million for the corporation. And so we would expect to earn that $15 million each and every year, subsequent year.
So 0.5% annualized going
Yeah.
forward. Okay, thank you. And the, I guess you just answered my next question was going to be, what is SaskPower projecting the increase in the OBPS carbon tax for 25, 26, 27? It's just projected to be that 0.5% or 15 million a year, or no?
Oh,
No.
That's what the 0.5% is going to be worth each year for us.
Okay. So then what is Power projecting to be the increase in the OBPS carbon tax for 25, 26, and 27?
Over the course of approximately the next 4 years, we're averaging about a 2% increase based on the carbon tax. Obviously, that'll be dependent upon the fuel mix that's used to generate electricity, the emissions associated with it, a series of different factors. If there's more hydro, obviously that will help to displace some of our more emitting generation. So as a planning assumption, SaskPower is using approximately 2% a year.
Okay, thank you. And does that fluctuate significantly year over year, or is it a fairly steady 2% each
It's
year?
fairly steady. It's anywhere from 1.7, 1.8 to 2.2, 2.3, somewhere in that area.
Okay, thanks. Do you have that for 25, 26, and 27 specifically?
I think so. Yeah. Just give me a second. These are forecasts. So forecasted for 25, 26, 2.3%, 26, 27, 2.2%, and 27, 28, 1.7%.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate very much that they're forecasts. So now I understand there's now the two funds that have been set up by the government that OBPS tax revenues flow into that SaskPower can access. The first, the Clean Electricity Grant, and the second for SMR planning and potential deployment. We've kind of touched on this, but can you specifically explain which OBPS tax revenues go into each of these two funds and what SaskPower must do in order to access the funds? Specifically, you know, who makes the decision to release the funds for generation projects?
Just to answer your question specifically, we've itemized how we think the Part 1 carbon tax proceeds, the $496 million, will flow back to the utility. And based on the budget document, we've outlined our forecast, and the budget was explicit about the 24-25 clean electricity transition grant back to the utility. And we forecasted out, and we've shared with you what we think the forecast will look like for the remaining 2 years. But it is the Ministry of the Environment that has the policy levers on the OBPS system. And so your questions really are about how that would be accessed and the policy questions. And we'd ask you to put those to the Ministry of Environment. I would note on page 48 of the budget, there is a table that lays out, I'm assuming this was built by Environment and Finance, that lays out what that kind of looks like. But the policy questions on how we would access it, the flow of those funds, other than the 140 in the Clean Electricity Transition Grant going through CIC and back to us, those would be questions for the Ministry of Environment.
Okay, I'd be happy to. I believe I did last year, so look forward to doing that again this year. I think next week. Can you just maybe clarify one point on this? My understanding was coming out of the budget week was that the clean electricity grant was primarily to be used for supporting SaskPower in deploying clean electrical generation. Pick your definition of clean. I don't care. That's not the semantics I want to get into. But in the discussion tonight, it sounds like SaskPower is now going to be using that primarily to offset potential rate increases for customer classes. I know the dollars aren't necessarily assigned as such, but can you help me understand how this fund is both used then to offset rate increases for SaskPower customers and also to build clean electrical generating capacity? Struggling to remember a word. We used to talk about this all the time when we were at school boards. We didn't want our dollars to be like contingent, like I can't remember the term for it. When I was a school board trustee, right? We didn't want you guys saying like you have to use these dollars for X, these dollars for Y. Yeah, there's another. It means the same thing. There's another word for it. It'll come to me like. Yes, they do. It's personal finance and public finance.
Thanks for the question. So there is a direct relationship. This essentially is, will go towards essentially what would be the fuel costs associated with clean energy sources that are already in a part of our plans or part of the plans going forward. So these would be essentially paying for the electricity that's going to be generated through clean energy projects. So there would be a payment regardless of whether or not we got the clean electricity grant or whether or not we would have to pursue rate increases earlier and higher without the clean electricity grants.
Okay, I promised I wasn't lying. I said before I didn't care about the definition of clean electricity, but I note it was changed in, I think the most recent, was it Bill 154 that the House just voted on? What does SaskPower, or Minister, I suppose, a fair question for you, how do you define clean electricity project? Which could be incorrect, but in Bill 154, it was basically anything beyond unabated coal.
So that's a very good question and something we hear a lot. So our definition of clean is lower non-emitting generation and transmission or distribution that's required to support the energy transition. So I could just give you an example of some of the projects that we have in the planned for the application of the provincial fund. So we have our clean electricity power purchase agreements. So the Western Lily Wind Energy Facility, the Riverhurst Wind Energy Facility, the Blue Hill Facility, the Golden South Wind Facility, the Beckevar Wind Facility, our Manitoba Hydro contracts for import of hydropower, solar contracts, flare gas, and biomass projects. We also have a number of operating expenses that we've agreed to. So in terms of our energy transition, our IPP development team, so our independent power producer team that works on building these renewable projects for us, transmission planning, our interconnection team, distribution planning, distributed energy resource planning, environmental strategic issues management, environmental performance and reporting, and the Shan greenhouse. We also have life extension and optimization on Cotter Creek 1, 2, and 3 and their overhauls, and BD3 and CCS maintenance. Other things that we have on there is vegetation management, CCUS studies, wind and hydro engineering studies, and DSM programs.
Thank you. So just going back to kind of the governance of the OBPS, I just want to, not to like split hairs, I just want to make sure I understand this like very clearly. SAS Power includes these dollars obviously in business planning and forecasting going forward. But ultimately the decision on how much goes into each pot and how SAS Power accesses those, that decision is made by the Minister of Environment or Ministry of Environment. And I don't know, maybe goes to Cabinet. I'm not sure what that process looks like. But I just want to be very clear for SAS Power's planning. That's how it works.
So thank you for the question. So every year as part of the annual budget making process, SAS Power would submit its budget through CIC, and CIC, Ministry of Finance, working with the Ministry of Environment, would then validate whatever our ask was in that process, and then we would be allocated the dollars. So it would be confirmed through the annual budget process through Ministry of Environment.
And are there specific OBPS tax revenues that go into each of those funds, or?
I got your question right, but on the revenue side, there's no allocation of revenues to each one of the expenses. It's on the revenues, We really match what the federal program has set aside in terms of the OBPS rates. So as the carbon tax increases, the total amount of revenue that we require is to cover that expense. And then once we've calculated that expense, we negotiate with CIC and the ministries on how we're going to apply those revenues to different programs, such as the ones I just listed.
Yeah. Thank you. So then how critical are the funds generated by the OBPS and then subsequently returned to SaskPower in terms of the financial position of the Crown going forward?
Thanks for the question. I mean, I guess a couple of things on this. One, it's $140 million for this year that's going to be going into SaskPower. That's going to help them to pay for some of the costs associated with bringing on lower emitting or non-emitting generation. The other part too, in terms of having it as a part of the OPPS system, is I think the officials have already identified, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million that has already been paid, that we're still negotiating to get back, and we'll get it back over a series of years. So, I would just say one of the benefits of doing it through the OPPS system is that it's more immediate in terms of when SaskPower has access to those dollars, rather than over time after lengthy negotiations with the federal government. So from that perspective, and I can't speculate what may happen in the future in terms of what the carbon tax may look like, but for now it's these are dollars that are going to be used to help keep rates affordable, as well as offset some of the costs that SaskPower has going forward with ensuring that we have a safe, reliable, affordable grid.
Thank you. So when you do your cost of service studies to set the rates for each of your customer classes and your major industrial customers, is the OBPS expense distributed across all of your customer classes? And if it is, how is it allocated across the customer classes? By what measures? Is it energy? Is it consumption? Is it demand? Is it a combination?
Okay, so in our cost of service methodology, the carbon tax is a part of our energy charge, and it is allocated identically to each and every customer class based on consumption, so based on kilowatt hours that you consume. If you look at the applications, rate applications, or you look at some of the breakdowns we've had on the carbon tax, the impact on each customer class will be different because the amount of consumption of energy that they have is different. So that's why, and the percentage that the consumption makes up of their total bill differs. So that's why you'll see different percentages, but everyone has the exact same charge, which is just over a cent a kilowatt hour now is what the total is today.
Okay, thank you. And when you speak about customer classes, you're including major industrial customers in that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So then, Minister, having heard you talk about yourself and your officials talk about some of the places that the OBPS dollars are going to be deployed, and the number of things that Mr. King listed off, as well as keeping rates affordable, and on. Does SaskPower have an official position with respect to the OBPS, whether or not it's beneficial or not to the Crown? I suppose the question really is like, do you believe that the provincial OBPS should be maintained no matter what happens at the federal level?
Thanks for the question, Ms. Young. I guess to that I would just say that, as I've said before, based on what we know today and what the law is in Canada, our view from a public policy position as the government of Saskatchewan is that the retention, the remittance of the dollars to the OPPS certainly has benefits for Saskatchewan and SaskPower, just in terms of the fact that, we have the ability to direct where those funds are going to go. It's a more immediate in terms of the direction of those funds. That being said, I think it's this government's view that our province and our economy would be better off not having to have an OPPS for the fact that there wouldn't be a carbon tax to be paid into. So, I would just say that continues to be the position of the government.
Thank you. So the Premier said publicly that the OBPS is a carbon tax and should be scrapped. That is the position then? Maybe canvassing the past couple of years, moving on to SMRs, recognizing, Minister, this is the first time we've been together in committee on SaskPower, but I spent a few years here with Minister Morgan. In 2023, former Minister Morgan indicated that kind of $5 billion was the ballpark figure for the cost of an SMR. All of this is pulled from Hansard, although I'm not going to go back and cite it kind of statement by statement, but he used that $5 billion number, which doesn't include any early adopted incentives provided by GE Hitachi, nor does it really account for that 15% investment tax credit that the federal government could potentially provide. I also recognize it probably doesn't reflect potential inflation in the SMR supply chain. The minister at that point did indicate that building, 2 or more, costs would come down substantially, of course, with economies of scale on some of the non-nuke components likely required to run the system, transmission, opening boards, IT, whatever. Does SAS Power have a more accurate cost estimate for an SMR given its stage 3 future supply option analysis, which projects at 2050, the cost of 4 generation supply options, which in 3 of those options include SMRs? I suppose I'll start there.
Thanks for the question. So you're right. The previous minister has used publicly the $5 billion number. I guess I would just say to that, a reliable capital cost estimate for the BWRX 300 is not going to be available to certainly until the construction of the first reactor is near completion. I think Ontario has, OPG has advised SAS Power that, over the coming months, they'll get a better idea, but we won't be building a business case on an estimate at this point of the number that we've talked about, that you've talked about publicly. A business case would be built upon more of a known number once OPG is further down their process.
Understand how SAS Power is projecting the costs of 4 generation supply options in like the extensive and I think very successful public engagement work that has been done by the utility at great cost.
Thanks for the question. It's a good question. I'd just say that for SMRs, but also for other options, SAS Power does use some pretty round numbers in terms of high-level estimates. The $5 billion is the number that is used as essentially a placeholder. But certainly when it comes time to developing a more detailed business case, we would have a better idea based on Ontario Power Generation's experience in building the first GE Hitachi BWRX 300.
So in analyzing the cost impact on ratepayers, given the fact that SAS Power is now in stage 3 of its analysis, which forecasts rate increases till 2050, is it the $5 billion round number that is being used? Okay.
That's correct, yes.
And when is OPG committed to sharing that information with the Government of Saskatchewan?
So Ontario Power Generation is currently in the process of design with GE Hitachi. They estimate that by late fall, early winter, they will have a Class 3 estimate, which will be shared publicly, not just with SAS Power, but shared widely publicly. And so that'll be the next step in their process and in our process in determining more of a refined cost of what the BWRX 300 would cost.
Thank you. So just to be really clear, the latest estimate for cost of an SMR in 2023 or 2024 dollars produced by GE Hitachi, the most specific number SaskPower can provide is $5 billion.
At this point, that's correct.
Thank you. And that does not include any incentives provided either by GE Hitachi or by the federal government.
That's correct.
And so I guess maybe what is the latest SaskPower forecast of the capital cost for the type of SMR that SaskPower is intending, is presently building, including connection to the transmission system?
So the number that we are using is the $5 billion. In terms of the transmission costs, that'll obviously depend upon the site that is selected, whether or not existing transmission infrastructure can be used, or if other transmission would need to be built out. And so a decision on that hasn't been made yet. And so we're using globally the number $5 billion. And then once we have a better idea in terms of the siting, that'll give us then the next step for SaskPower to be able to refine the numbers in terms of what would be needed to transmit the energy that would be produced from that site.
Is there a range of costs for transmission?
So in terms of the transmission costs, for a single SMR, again, as we do our siting work, depending on where it goes will impact the overall transmission. When we did the siting, transmission expense is one of the criteria that was used to determine where you should put it. So we look to minimize those transmission expenses. So for in terms of our long-term planning and the high level that we do it at, the transmission cost specific to a single SMR is not significant. However, the transmission costs for the entire energy transition, as well as distribution costs, become certainly far more significant. And when we look at the total shift, and not just one SMRs, but the entire shift in SMRs, the addition of renewables, the potential addition of CCS, and building up that infrastructure itself is really where those dollars go. So we, at the level that we're looking at for out to 2050, we plan more at a macro level than a detailed micro level that I think you're looking for on the SMR.
Sure. Do you have a cost that you use at the macro level for transmission distribution?
Sorry, just to clarify,
Just building off Mr. King's comments.
but like on a single SMR, is that kind of
Yeah.
the scenario you're looking at?
Yeah. Or, I mean, I'm not sure that the former minister, I know the decision-making timeline is looking at one, potentially two. Former Minister Morgan has also speculated publicly about potentially building 8 or 9, so I'm not sure. I'm trying to suss out what SaskPower is actually trying to plan for and what the costs associated with that would be.
Thanks for the question. For strictly hypothetical scenarios, if SaskPower was to build 4 SMR units at Estevan, it would be essentially no incremental cost for transmission. If it was to be built at Elbow, you'd be looking $70 to $100 million.
Thanks. So going back to that nice around $5 billion number, is that number 2024 dollars or simply be cost in nominal dollars over the time frame of construction?
That's an inflated number to 2034.
Thank you. What's the projected annual operating cost for the type of SMR that SaskPower is planning to develop?
So thank you for the question. So just keeping in mind that we're, 10 years away from the operation, and as the design continues to progress, the objective is to focus on safety while minimizing operating costs. So we won't actually have a clear picture of what the operating costs of BWRX 300 are until after Ontario goes into production and power. And so we don't have, that's a little bit too far away in terms of our planning horizons to have a cost estimate.
I want to come back to Ontario in a second. My next question was going to be in terms of the impact on the cost of electricity for residential rate payers and how this compared to other forms of generation. Is it safe to assume SaskPower does not have that information and doesn't include that in their future planning either?
In terms of non-emitting baseload technologies, whether we're talking about nuclear, hydro, or carbon capture on natural gas, which is yet unproven, the cost estimate in terms of levelized cost of energy that we're using for our planning assumptions is in that 180 to 220 range. And so that's what we use for the purposes of our planning assumptions, and then therefore what we use as part of our rate impact estimation. I would tell you, again, as we build out renewables, as we look at solar, wind, biomass, other renewable and low-emitting technologies, carbon capture and natural gas, and then ultimately nuclear, we'll continue to have a mixed portfolio in Saskatchewan in terms of the power mix and power production. In the Premier's press conference last May, he had indicated that rate increases out to 2035 would be in that double-digit mark, between 90 and 110% rate increases, absent any federal, provincial, taxpayer interventions or subsidies that the federal government has put on the table.
Thank you. And I noted in SaskPower's supply planning overview mix, there's a rate increase of, I believe it's 2.5% to 4% contemplated annualized out to 2050, regardless of the supply mix. Do you have, what number is SaskPower working with in terms of, you cited the percentage increase.
Thanks for the question, Ms. Young. Going back to our earlier part of this evening, that 2 to 3% is the assumption that we're using for planning purposes. That's correct.
Thank you. So you reference levelized cost of electricity when looking at generating options. In an effort to ensure transparency for ratepayers, does SaskPower have any intention of publishing levelized cost of electricity generation analysis?
As part of the future power consultations, SAS Power has made that information public.
And will you be doing that once there's a more accurate number than $5 billion?
Yes.
Thank you. So the Premier's been quoted as saying that any SMRs built in Saskatchewan will be publicly owned. How much incremental debt will be required to fund the initial SMR?
Thanks for the question. I guess I would just say that I can't give a definitive answer on that because there's a number of ways in which we would essentially capitalize the construction of an SMR. So the small modular reactor fund, that balance will build up over time, and so my assumption would be that would be used as a contribution. We've also have an expectation that the federal government is going to play a major role in funding the capital costs for our first SMR. We don't have confirmation on that. As well, the Premier has also talked about Indigenous equity participation. We're still working through what that would look like, to what level, who would fund that. And so until we have a better idea of certainly a number of those outstanding questions, I think it's too soon, it's premature to speculate what the impact of building an SMR would do to issues like SAS Power's debt level, et cetera.
So then maybe, hopefully, a question you can be more specific on. I'm noting SAS Power's debt has increased quite rapidly over the past couple of years, and for 24-25, it's projected to exceed $9 billion. Can you provide your projected debt for each of the 5 years going out? So that'd be 25-26, 26-27, 27-28, 28-29, and 29-30. Ms. Young, we're forecasting debt level
For 24-25, so I'll give you the next 5 years, including 24-25, 9.044 billion, rising to 9.7 billion, 10.2, 10.5, and 11, just over 11 billion.
Thank you. And that 11 billion is for 28-29 or 29? Okay.
28-29.
And do you have a 29-30 number?
11.8.
Thank you. So at a cost then of theoretically $5 billion each, maybe there's some, hopefully federal money, maybe there's some incentives provided for early adopters by GE Hitachi. Not sure what number we're working with, but 4 to 8 SMRs could result in essentially doubling the province's gross debt, which I think is currently just shy of $35 billion. Has Sask Power discussed the implications of borrowing potentially over $30 billion on the province's credit rating with the Ministry of Finance?
Thanks for the question, Ms. Young. Certainly, there's been discussions with finance with respect to, I think broadly the issues of the transition to the, particularly under the clean electricity regulations. But I would just say that I won't speculate in terms of the number of SMRs that we may be looking at into the future. We will have these discussions regardless, whether it's SMRs, whether it's large-scale hydro, whether it's natural gas with CCS, because as we've already indicated, we're using roughly the same type of number for the cost of energy for all these different possible future electricity developments. This is at the crux of the problem that we have with the clean electricity regulations as they are by 2035. As we've said before, it's logistically, it's technologically, it's financially going to be very significant for this province to try to even come close to attempting what the federal government's doing. That's why we're asking for the timelines to be pushed back. So certainly conversations have been had with finance to indicate that we need to do something, there will be significant costs with whatever options we look at into the future. Part of that's driven by the timelines. Part of that's driven by the fact that we're a growing economy and that we need to renew our electricity generation in this province. We need to decarbonize it. We're being asked that by our customers, both residential and commercial, and we need to keep rates affordable. And so the longer that we can lengthen out this transition, obviously will be better for SaskPower, it'll be better for the customers of this province, it'll be better for the financial picture. But finance is, I would say, been involved in the discussions about what potentially this could cost the province.
Thank you, Minister. So there have been specific conversations related to the potential impacts of borrowing for SMRs.
I would say there's been conversations about what the potential paths look like for SaskPower to ensure that we have electricity for people to be able to heat their homes and run their businesses and keep the lights on. In terms of the impact that that has on credit agencies and the financial outlook for the province, I would just say that that's probably a better question for the finance officials. We've provided the information. SaskPower continues to provide the information in terms of this is particularly what in our view, my view, a hasty electricity transition could entail in terms of the impacts. What finance makes of that in terms of what credit agencies may do with that information, I can't speculate on that.
Sure. Thank you. Is SaskPower CIC contemplating establishing a separate Crown corporation for SMRs?
No.
Thank you. What other government agencies, boards, commissions, crowns, or ministries are incurring costs associated with the SMR project? Obviously, we've talked in the past about environment, about CIC.
Certainly SAS Power, and I can say as Minister of CIC, CIC has created a unit within the organization dealing with other issues around energy security and transition, not specific solely to nuclear, but including nuclear. I can't speculate in terms of what other ministries are expending funds based on this issue. Obviously, we have interactions with environment. There's the work of the Saskatchewan Research Council, advanced education. I know the presidents of the three organizations have signed an MOU. I don't know what costs they entailed, so I can't speak to those.
Like specific targeted funds that you're aware of that have been set aside, like as you referenced for the Nuclear Secretariat and CIC, or?
No,
Okay.
not that I can.
I believe the budget for SMR pre-work until 2029 was set at $140 million. How much of that was spent in 23-24 and on what? And further, what's the budget for 24-25 and what will that be spent on? I'm also curious if this includes the $74 million committed by the federal government, which should be pretty straightforward.
So in terms of 23-24, we are forecasting to have spent $18.6 million in that fiscal year, and in the budget for next year, we are forecasting $25.4 million.
Thank you. And is that the same? We talked about this last year. Those are the dollars set aside for engagement specifically?
They encompass far more than just engagement. They cover the entire program that we do have.
Okay. And sorry, that $140 million, does that include the $74 million from the feds?
Yes. Both amounts should be fully covered by the funding that we have from the federal government. We have two sources of funds. So we have NRCan that's provided $50 million of funding, and then we have funding from the Future Electricity Fund, which is the carbon tax rebate of $80 million. So we have $130 million of funding available to us. So both of these this current fiscal year and the following fiscal year should be fully funded.
Thank you. I thought last year when we discussed the SMR engagement, public engagement work that was going on, it was indicated that in 23, $18.7 million was spent, and for coming fiscal, which I suppose would be this year, about $21.9 million would be spent.
A little bit higher than that right now. Our forecast is for the coming fiscal year, $25.4 million.
So, but that is not exclusively for public engagement work then. Last year was...
Public engagement would have been one of the bigger items in there, but it's not exclusively for public engagement.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So then what? Those were the figures provided last year in estimates for the engagement work specifically, so I'm just looking to clarify how much has been spent on public engagement for SMRs.
It's included in that number, okay?
I'll endeavor to come back to you, to the committee, with an answer on this. That number that you're looking for will be in that global number that Mr. King has given in terms of the SMR unit. But we don't have it broken out into kind of what was used on the consultation. This is the staff, the travel, things of that nature. So we'll endeavor to come back to you.
Thank you. Is it reasonable to expect that within like a month?
I'll take your request under advisement.
Okay. Thank you. I will follow up. So I said I want to come back to Ontario, and I do. We seem to have tied the future of SaskPower to Ontario and to OPG and their development of SMRs. I also note that the Minister for Energy in Ontario has recently spoken publicly about the fact that Ontario now has 80% of the SMR supply chain, which obviously poses a lot of opportunities for Ontario and Ontario businesses, suppliers, and contractors. But if Ontario falters or changes course, what will be the risk to SaskPower having put its eggs in the SMR basket?
Thanks, Ms. Young, for the question. I guess I'll start just by saying that, SaskPower went through a very thorough process looking at small modular reactors. I guess a couple of things. One, the technology that was selected, the GE Hitachi 300 BWRX. So 300 megawatts. It's essentially as big as our largest generating, existing generation that we have in the province. So it fits within our grid in terms of being able to incorporate the megawatts that it would generate. We certainly think that in terms of additional risk, the project has been de-risked by the fact that OPG is building the first one. Tennessee Valley Authority has also selected GE Hitachi, or looking to, I think they have selected GE Hitachi. And so from that perspective, we would not be the first of a kind if we decide to build the GE Hitachi 300 model. And in fact, when you look at the technology that was down-selected by Sask Power, I think that from that perspective, the risk profile of the BWRX 300, knowing that X is 10, it's the 10th of the generation. So there is a significant amount of de-risking that's taking place by the fact that it is this far along in terms of the technology, but also the other technologies that were studied by Sask Power. Would get into issues around the fuel, HALEU, which is essentially sourced from Russia. Obvious problems with that. And so from a de-risking perspective, the BWRX 300 was really seen as the least risky technologies as we looked at SMR technology. In terms of the supply chain, Ontario is already engaged with organizations like CIMSA in the province. Regardless of the type of asset that we're building, there will be components that will not be able to be procured or built in Saskatchewan. It's no different from a natural gas plant to an SMR, but there are things that we are interested in, especially on the workforce, to being able to supply here in Saskatchewan. And so Ontario has been very collaborative in working with Saskatchewan, including Sask Power, including organizations like CIMSA, to determine what parts of the supply chain could be built in Saskatchewan and provided in Saskatchewan, not only for our project, but even potentially for Ontario's and others that could be built around the world, provided that GE is the technology selected by other jurisdictions, which looks likely.
Thank you. So hearing your comments, it's the advantage really that you see coming from essentially following behind, I don't say that pejoratively, but falling behind in terms of a chronology behind Ontario is really in the same selection of the potential technology.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. We don't take, essentially by, and I would agree with that in terms of following on, we don't take the first of a kind risk. That's going to be Ontario Power Generation that's going to take that risk.
And if anything were to change with Ontario, would Saskatchewan still be able to pursue this project and meet its own timelines? Don't get me wrong, Premier Ford looks very comfortable. I see that this is a long-standing plan in Ontario, but as a major risk.
Some comments, because I don't know if I can answer your question directly. But so again, the BWRX 300 is a 10th iteration, if you will, of a boiling water reactor. So from a technology perspective, the risk is mitigated with respect to the design of a 300 versus a 700 or 1,000 megawatt reactor. It's a miniaturization of a larger technology, in other words. Based on what we have ongoing conversations with both Tennessee Valley Authority and Ontario Power Generation on how their project is moving, because we are moving as part of a consortium, an SMR consortium in Canada, with TVA as an American partner on this project. And so we have regular conversations based on everything that they're seeing in design. There are no fundamental design challenges that they've encountered. And so the risk profile is decreasing as they get further into the design, and why they'll be ready with a level 3 cost estimate by the end of this year, calendar year, is because things are moving exactly as they're supposed to be moving. So yeah, maybe I can just leave the question there, because I can't really speculate on if there's some unknown that arises. I wouldn't be able to speculate on that.
Sure. Maybe last question on Ontario. In reviewing some of the conversations and public comments coming out of the Ontario meetings on SMRs last year, it was indicated that, pardon me, in reviewing the discussions that we had here last year, Mr. Pandy, I believe you indicated that any potential build of SMRs would be done in province by private contractors. And in reviewing the SMR National Action Plan, it indicates that a fleet-based approach leverages the experience of previous builds, resulting in reduced regulatory timelines, uncertainty, which in turn should lead to shorter construction timelines, faster deployment schedules, and reduced construction costs. Will the work in Saskatchewan then be done by private contractors from Ontario? That's...
So thank you for the question, member, and you're quite right. A fleet-based approach to the development of a new nuclear technology, optimizes efficiency with respect to construction and all of the other benefits that you've noted. What I would share, and these are ongoing conversations that we're having with our colleagues in Ontario, but other jurisdictions now in Canada, as multiple jurisdictions are now looking at the question of new nuclear, is that, given the amount of work that Ontario has to do with respect to refurbishments on their existing nuclear fleet, so they were in the process of refurbishing the Darlington nuclear plant, and now the Pickering nuclear plant has just been announced for refurbishment, along with the Darlington new project, which is the BWRX 300s, that there is already a full saturation of nuclear in Ontario, their nuclear workforce with respect to the projects that they have. The Ontario system generator, the Ontario system operator, ISO, reported that as part of their long-term planning report that they'd require something like 18 gigawatts of new nuclear in Ontario between now and 2050, which is about 18,000 megawatts, more than 3 times the size of our current grid. And so when you look at Western Canada and the potential for nuclear out to 2050 to achieve, just on the electricity front, net zero, that's potentially another 15 gigawatts or 15,000 megawatts of new nuclear. So there's not sufficient workforce in Ontario to come and build reactors in Saskatchewan. And so the strategy has to be, and something I know the minister has been talking about, but certainly I've been talking about in forums that I've attended, to how do we activate, on a Canada-wide basis, workforce that's going to help us decarbonize electricity as fast as possible. And so what we have in mind right now is an operating model. Again, this is early days, but is to ensure that there's Western Canadian constructors who are nuclear certified, who would be able to start building nuclear in Saskatchewan, and if the government should decide to go the route of nuclear, but also in Alberta and other jurisdictions that are also looking at the question. So yes, it's true that a fleet-based approach would minimize cost, but that fleet-based know-how can be transferred without transferring the build of an entire project to another province company. In fact, quite the contrary, we think it's necessary that we're looking at Western Canadian constructors for our first projects, just because Ontario constructors will be fully saturated.
Thank you. This maybe my last question in the SMR area. I want to commend SaskPower for the outreach to the public that has been done in determining the future supply options for the province. Stage 3 was published very recently, I think last month, and provides very high-level analysis of the 4 supply options, although I will note that hard data are largely absent. There's a cost of $53 billion to 2050 associated with a diverse mix of supply, and it contemplates a 173% increase in rates to 2050. A diverse mix that would be implemented by 2035 costs $56 billion with a 160% rate increase to 2050. Both options, of course, would still have CO2 emissions of, I believe, just over 200,000 tons in 2050. I guess looking at some of these outcomes that SaskPower itself is publishing, will the utility be publishing the detailed analysis and assumptions contemplated in each of the 4 scenarios associated with stage 3 of future supply options?
Thank you for the question, member. Maybe I'll just start with just a little bit of background on what the long-term supply plan is and how it works in the context of our own planning. So long-term supply planning is really a best practice of utilities across North America, where they will look at, on a 2 to 3 year cycle, will look at prospective needs of the power system and engage with the public with respect to their values and priorities in terms of what those prospective needs are look like. It's typically used in rate-regulated utilities by independent rate review panels, but it's certainly being used as an expectation on the part of Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada as a requirement for Saskatchewan to get approvals with respect to either combined cycle gas plants with carbon capture, new hydro facilities, and or new nuclear facilities. And so, we took the opportunity to start this engagement a number of years ago. And in the process of engaging, we've shared levelized cost of energy, which is really I guess, the most accurate representation of cost of the scenarios. And so I appreciate the scenarios are being shared. The long-term plan really functions as an input into our annual planning process. So again, although a long-term integrated resource plan that looks at generation, transmission, and public values priorities is created every 2 to 3 years, that information is used to inform our annual plan, which actually drives the investments that we'll do on an annual basis with respect to the power system. And so it's meant to educate the public on the costs of energy and how the energy system works, but also to, again, and importantly, gather their priorities in terms of how they think they can participate in supporting the utility with respect to the objectives around decarbonizing electricity. And so it's a plan that is updated every 2 to 3 years, and much of what is in a plan that forecasts out to 2050, you will appreciate, is fully forecasting assumptions. And I don't mean to minimize the importance of it. Clearly, it's an important document. And again, because we've shared publicly levelized cost of energy assumptions with respect to all the different technologies that we've talked about, we believe that has there's sufficient disclosure in terms of cost around the energy the energy choices that we're making. And again, those levelized cost of energy assumptions in the information shared in future planning would be, again, forecasts, and they would be subject to refinement as new data comes in. There is a publicly available levelized cost data out of the United States called Lazars. It's updated annually in the same way we try to update our information annually so that we have the most up-to-date levelized cost of energy data available to share with the public. So I don't know if there's other information, Minister Troy, you would like to add?
I'll just maybe quickly mention, I think the document makes it very clear it's not a prescribed path forward. It lays out potential scenarios. And I think one of the challenges and one of the reasons why I think this is a very fascinating portfolio, it's changing so fast, so rapidly, particularly on the regulatory side. I can say that the last time I was minister was when the Chinook Power Station was commissioned, and in the process of starting the Great Plains. And, I very clearly remember getting a phone call kind of in the middle of that process indicating that, once again, the regulations had changed. And so it just, in a very short amount of time, we've experienced significant change. So I think all of that to say that it makes it difficult for all these folks to kind of plan for what the future looks like when goalposts continue to shift and regulations continue to change. And so it's not a prescribed path, but it lays out, here are potential scenarios going forward.
Thank you for that. And it's, I think, establishing some clear goalposts, detailed analysis, and understanding more transparently what metrics and what measures have gone to inform those options is kind of the intent of my question, which was whether SaskPower would publish the detailed analysis and assumptions contemplated in each of those 4 scenarios associated with stage 3 of future supply options. Like, to be clear, I'd be, you folks know this better than I do, but, things like what was the discounted rate included in developing these scenarios? What's the assumed annual increase in demand? Were there implications for transmission and distribution systems contemplated? What about transmission congestion problems? All of these things really that I hear sincerely that, people who also find this a very engaging portfolio want to hear in order to give credibility to those 4 options being contemplated. But having heard that is not the intent, I will move on. Given SaskPower's own analysis, there is a $3 billion cost difference between the two diverse mix scenarios of 2035 and 2050. And the rate change is less in the 2035 scenario by SaskPower's own documents, and likely has fewer total emissions. And likely fewer total emissions would be achieved under the 2035 scenario. So that's interesting. Does SaskPower see the 2035 scenario then as superior to the 2050 diverse supply mix?
Thanks for the question. I'll have Mr. King talk a little bit about a little bit more detail, but I'll just say that, so this is based on public engagement. It's about education, an educational exercise. And the scenarios are really driven by public input. So the public wants to know information in terms of what future supply options could look like. And so it's not so much whether it's superior or inferior in terms of that renewable 2035. It's just, it's not feasible. But I'll ask Mr. King to go into a little bit more detail.
Based on maybe what some might perceive as some inconsistencies between statements that SaskPower has made and the outcomes of that engagement work.
Sorry, inconsistencies how?
Just in terms of looking at the analysis and whether or not SaskPower saw the 2035 scenario as superior. But I'm hearing that's a no.
No, that's a no, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And then one last question, then I'd like to move on and ask some questions about hydro. I think, so I hear concerns from people out there in regards to the SMR discussion overall, worried that it is not in fact a sincere engagement process, worried that it's more of a path to inevitability and that a decision has already been made. And so, you know, to be clear, the position that the public position that we've taken as a party is that this might be part of Saskatchewan's power future. This might be part of Saskatchewan's energy future, and it very well could be. But this needs to be a sincere, open, and accountable process in order to ensure that it is the right choice for Saskatchewan. But for the people who fear that this is a path to inevitability and who see comments made publicly, thinking specifically of numerous comments made by the Premier that, you know, when we build these SMRs, we've made a decision on this, we're moving forward with this, and now they see a fund set up for that. I suppose, Minister, what is the answer that you can give to people to assure them that the analysis for building future supply for Saskatchewan people that is affordable, sustainable, and reliable, that process has integrity and that a decision has not already been made?
Thanks for the question, Ms. Young. I guess what I would say is, we have laid out a path that will put us in a position to make a decision whether or not to pursue construction of an SMR in Saskatchewan. The decision has not been made. But we're going through our due diligence because we think that that's a reasonable and responsible thing to do. I would just say that both the CNSC process, in terms of, for example, site licensing, is a very rigorous process. The public engagement part of it is an absolute requirement. And the same would be true for the impact assessment. A meaningful consultation is a part of what is required for any proponent, including SaskPower, to go through. So, I would just say that particularly with the CNSC, who are the experts in this, there's no way to fake the public consultation part of it. They understand this, they are experienced in it, and I think they would see right through it. If they thought that we were just going through the motions because a decision has already been made, they'd be able to tell. And so I'm satisfied that we are going through a very rigorous process to eventually make a decision to whether to pursue an SMR in Saskatchewan or not. I would just say the other thing too to keep in mind, in this highly regulated environment under the current federal government, we have very limited options. And so I'm completely satisfied that the folks at SaskPower are doing a tremendous job of consulting with the public, of doing their due diligence and do their homework. And whoever will be sitting in my chair when the time comes to make the next series of decisions on this will have all the information that they need because of the work that's being done by the people at SaskPower. I have absolute confidence in that. A decision has not been made, but when it comes time to making a decision, whoever's making that decision will have an abundance of information to make that decision.
Thank you, Minister. Has SaskPower evaluated the impacts of the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project and its various phases on its hydro generation at all 3 hydro sites on the North and South Saskatchewan River? I've been doing this for hours.
I would never, ever do something. Okay, maybe.
I never used to, and then during, I think it was like, maybe the Bill 70 schmoz, I noticed, not gonna name names, but a minute, Mr. of the Crown was constantly eating what appeared to be peanut M&Ms from the cup. And I got very jealous. I think it was like pregnant ravenous at 11 o'clock at night. I thought,
Maybe.
just eating some candy if I ever need to.
That's one thing I think, I'm pretty sure our lounge has they ever had on your lounge, or what I hear.
Since I've taken over as whip, there's been a real sea change. I think you guys still win. I do not, I love to cook, I do not have the capacity to do it for my colleagues.
We have called.
I know, you've got the better young, I know. But there's frequently bags and bags and bags of chips and,
You're full of posting it.
I'm just telling it like it is.
We get like turkey dinner.
I know,
Beef.
I know.
Pies.
When I'm a government backbencher, I will cook for my entire caucus lounge. Heard it here first.
I have this week, I'm gonna make 2 pounds of, on Thursday, 2 pounds of sweet cornbread, ribs, and homemade wages.
We should swap cornbread. Next time I make, so I don't eat pork, but next time I make sad pork-free beans and cornbread, I will bring you some as an exchange. And you can be very I've convinced her she loves to bake cookies, really, just so that I can eat them over the course of the day.
I'm not a cookie person.
No, I used to make cookies.
These ones are really good. I brown the butter, which sounds super bougie, but my friend did it, and it's just so good.
You ever put butter in wine or make it flavorful?
Brown the butter, and I use dark chocolate, and I put a little bit of sea salt on top of the cookies, so they're like a little savory.
Well, you just said it with butter, not margarine.
Yeah.
Never margarine.
Oh boy, oh boy. I'll share it.
Well, the three main food groups are butter, chocolate, and sugar. Like, I mean, if you have that, you can make anything.
I agree. My go-to dessert lately has been lava cakes. They're easy to make and go around and get bake really good. You got it.
I was down in the States when we had the sugar shortage. And I brought back a big pack of sugar, and I got to customs, and he asked me what I had for clearly. Anyway, I went through the stuff, and I said, the most important thing, I'm sure I heard bring it back, is a bag of sugar.
Save One in my neighborhood has still not recovered from the sugar shortage. They're still struggling to keep it on the shelf. It's so weird. They've got all these weird like coconut sugars, kind of like these alternatives. They're trying to sell.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. It's like back down. Far north, that's like easy for everyone.
Plastic prices are critical minerals. Get it in there.
Thanks for the question. So SaskPower works on an ongoing basis with the Water Security Agency, and they continue to work with them as the province is moving forward with additional irrigation in the province. You know, I would say the irrigation projects in and of themselves aren't cause for alarm from WSA or SaskPower, in that the biggest contributors to river flow for Saskatchewan is precipitation in May and June of each year. So it really is dependent upon not in and of itself the irrigation projects moving forward, but what does ongoing precipitation look like in the out years.
It's interesting. So initial engineering assessments for the recently announced West Side Irrigation Project contemplated a power draw just for that project, equivalent to, and I forgive me, I didn't write down cost and power, but roughly 25 to 30% of equivalency to the city of Saskatoon. Like, it's fairly significant. 'Cause, you know, it's not working with gravity, but that water's all getting pushed sideways potentially. So that would strike me as significant from SaskPower's perspective. But I suppose maybe a straightforward question here: what is the reduction in hydro capacity as a consequence of the irrigation project? And is this specific to? Forgive me, I've never said this one out loud, and I think I'm going to say it really French. Do we say Cotto here? Great, thank you. The Cotto Creek facility, or is that to all three hydro facilities on this river system? I know being fake, but as I got close to that, I was like, oh shit, I'm going to say it French, aren't I? I grew up in Cotto Beach. Saskatchewan always tricks you. Like, you think it's being fake, and then you're like, okay, well, it's got to be Forget, but it's Forche.
Thanks for the question, member. So, you know, as the minister indicated, we continue to work with WSA on the irrigation project and its impacts on our hydro facilities in particular. I think that was the first part of your question. And the answer, remains the same, which is at present there is no impact that we've modeled because of the irrigation projects on the hydro, on our hydro facilities, based on normal hydro years. I would say in terms of the power requirements that you've laid out, those are speculative, again, depending on the size of that project. I think we've heard that, it would require another 377 megawatt combined cycle gas plant to serve that need, and potentially, and I'm not aware of the study you're looking at right there, specifically referencing 30% of the power needs of Saskatoon, but there would be other power requirements to facilitate irrigation, but I thought the question was specifically on impact on our hydro facilities.
Sure. So then, given that every cubic meter that's diverted, having heard the answer, but every cubic meter that's diverted is unavailable for generation at not one, not two, but three facilities. Has SaskPower financially accounted for the potential loss of generation, or, potential, I suppose, opportunity cost at market price, and what would be that cost?
Okay, thanks for the question again, member. So again, we continue to work with Water Security Agency on the impacts of irrigation on all of our hydro facilities. At present, we have no impacts that have been modeled against our hydro facilities, and we'll continue to work with them. And if and when those impacts become known, we're happy to share them.
Great. Thank you. In last year's CCA meeting on May 3rd, Minister Morgan indicated that the hydro facility at Diefenbaker didn't operate for a significant portion of the 2022 year, and that this was backfilled by coal and natural gas, the fuel costs of which contributed to the financial duress SaskPower found itself in at that time. So are there projected costs associated with fuel and purchase power to compensate for potentially another low water year or lack of hydro capacity going forward? And is there an associated carbon tax charge that the utility will be paying if they're forced to backfill hydro with emitting power?
Thanks again for the question, member. If I understand your question, it was in reference to last year's low hydro and its impact on SaskPower. And the answer to the question, I think, is answered from last year, but it is absolutely true that if there's lower hydro and lower production on our hydro facilities, that will result in a different fuel mix that's applied. And if that fuel mix happens to include emitting fuels, then there's a carbon tax requirement on that fuel. Going forward, but we wouldn't speculate on what those hydro flows would look like based on what the minister's already said with respect to May and June rains, so.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly enter what I'm going to call the random questions portion of my evening, looking at the time. So forgive me for the general incoherence from queue to queue here. I do have a specific question about the WBE program for women entrepreneurs. Forgive me, I forget what the acronym stands for, but I understand it's a cost of $1,000, $1,200 for any woman-owned business to be recognized as such. My understanding is that participants pay that fee to a federal third party and then are accorded, if they're accredited, forgive me if that's not the right language, 2.5 additional points for, it's almost 9:30, procurement, in the procurement process, forgive me. What's the feedback that you've heard from participants on this? Are women-owned businesses happy about paying, the $1,000 or whatever it is to prove that they're female-owned businesses? And did SaskPower ever contemplate doing something like using the ISC registry to provide this free of charge to women-owned businesses in the province?
I'm happy to stay hours more. You have no idea how hard I pitch for SaskPower, and sadly, every year 3 hours I must be doing something. But PSC is a spicy little meatball this year. Yeah. And sports. And sport. And sport. And SGI, we weren't allowed to ask questions about SGI this year. It doesn't work. It's not tied to the phone. Yeah. Yeah, they don't want you asking questions. Nothing. There we go. I approve.
Why is Mr. so good?
How was the treat? I've only ever had the. It isn't, yeah, it was like, I knew.
I actually took a course that was on the integration of the power grid between North America. That's really interesting. Yeah.
It boggles my mind. There's so many different, between north, south, east,
Texas.
Like all the different power pools in the states.
and as a federation, a country that we've kind of also with every province have different, like, I guess this is provincial jurisdiction, right?
It's easier to flow power north and south.
Oh, interesting, not,
What do you think about going north-south in Canada?
What's that?
What do you think about going north-south in Canada?
Or,
Power
who do you?
and WT, like increasing that.
Power, yes. It's expensive to build in the ship. That's where these SMRs can be just.
because you have to also send, you have to send resources, build it up.
That's all the transmission going.
Rhea Brown, SaskPower. Thank you for the question. So the question is on our women-owned business program and the certification process. What I can share on this is that although there is a fee for our women entrepreneurs in Saskatchewan to get certified through WBE, some of the feedback that we have received has been positive in the way that this opens doors for Saskatchewan entrepreneurs to work across Canada. So in fact, one of our big supplier success stories is a local women-owned construction company, Breck Construction, that recently won a Canadian award through WBE. And this is opening doors for their construction company throughout Canada. WESC is a local women-owned business, women entrepreneurs of Saskatchewan, pardon me. And WESC looks at Saskatchewan-only women entrepreneurs. But within our supply chain, it's much bigger than just Saskatchewan. Our supply chain is global. So we need accreditation means that can look beyond our province.
And I'll just add, one of the challenges, because I know it was raised with me by one of your colleagues a couple of weeks ago, one of the challenges with having an organization like WESC do the essentially certification is that there's no guarantee that that's recognized out of the province. So it limits the ability for women entrepreneurs to be able to bid on work outside of the borders of Saskatchewan, which, as Ms. Brown has indicated, we've seen some really good success from women entrepreneurs that have been successful not only here in Saskatchewan, but outside of Saskatchewan as well.
I'll just remind members we have just under 10 minutes remaining in this session.
Sad.
Thanks.
Sad. Thank you. I will then re-up my willingness to receive any information at a later date. But can you advise on the number of gigawatt hours sold to each of your 6 major customer classes in 23-24 and the projected gigawatt hour sales SaskPower is forecasting for 24-25?
I'll have to take this in steps here. I'll have to flip the different pages here. But if we start for 23-24, and I'm going to give you a forecast because I don't have the final numbers for the last month of the year. So on residential, 3,243 gigawatt hours. For commercial, 3,757 gigawatt hours. Oil fields, 4,291 gigawatt hours. The power class, 10,514 gigawatt hours. Farm, 1,317 gigawatt hours. And reseller, 1,148 gigawatt hours. So in terms of the budget for 24-25, which I think was your second question, residential is 3,387 gigawatt hours. Farm, 1,310 gigawatt hours. Commercial, 3,863 gigawatt hours. Oil field, 4,441 gigawatt hours. Our power class, 10,395 gigawatt hours. And our reseller, 1,179 gigawatt hours. And that's our budget.
Thank you very much. Can you speak to the changes that were made to the open access transmission tariff last year and what the implications are for how the Crown does business?
It's changed every year. So the first year I did it, I had Hera, and I just stepped out to nurse her, and like twice, and I forget who the chair was, but they took that off my tongue. So I was like, lost half an hour, which like fine. And then last year That's great. Community roots program.
Maybe before I give you an answer, I'll just clarify your question. In terms of changes to OAT, are you referring to the interprovincial transmission tariff that SAS Power is introducing on a pilot basis as part of our Renewable Access Service, or RAS, program?
I don't know. I understood there were more significant changes than that, just that one made.
No, that's the major change that has been made, is we're introducing a program that is going to allow customers to work with third parties to build renewables.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So it's called the Interprovincial Transmission Tariff Program. So it's separate from OAT. OAT is a program for customers outside Saskatchewan to wheel power either into Saskatchewan or across. So, for example, Manitoba to Alberta. The IPT program, it has been developed to allow for transmission within the province. So as part of our ongoing process for the energy transition, customers are looking to build their own self-generation. This is going to facilitate large industrial customers finding third parties to potentially build and own and operate renewable generation. SAS Power will act as an agent to wheel that power from the location to the customer's place of service. And the IPTT is really the program that allows for us to charge for that service of enabling those renewables and moving that power from the source to the consumer.
Thank you. Probably my last question of the night. We'll find out. Looking at SAS Power's Achieving Sustainability Through Collaboration, Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability report, there's a precipitous drop in 26-27 when it comes to emissions. And again, this occurs in 2035. Is this attributed to the phase out of conventional coal? And is SAS Power still planning for the phase out of its conventional coal generating facilities?
That's correct. The 2027 date is BD6 coming offline, so it represents the drop in emissions from that.
Thank you. And then looking at the same task force on climate-related, looking at the same report, the task force on climate-related financial disclosures. Can you maybe explain to me some of the risks identified by SAS Power? Looking at the climate change risks identified in this document, the risks include the closure of coal generating assets, the clean electricity regs, and the carbon tax, and obviously we can canvass our agreement on the appropriateness of some of these things, but I'm curious about reconciling those as climate change risks. So can you walk me through that, as well as how that's consistent with the utility standing as a sustainability electricity leader designation? I was on page 46 of the Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability Report.
Thank you for that question, member. So what we've endeavored to do is to identify what are short-term risks and short-term opportunities relative to a range of risk factors. So maybe I could just walk through them in a little bit of detail and just explain. So the environmental regulation, there's a significant uncertainty with respect to the clean electricity regulations and what ultimately will be the stringencies that are prescribed in that regulation. And those create risks with respect to investment decisions that the utility makes going forward on a whole host of issues, but in particular will impact our modeling of federal carbon tax payments, et cetera. Extreme weather is obviously an inherent risk of climate change and something we identify in and of itself. The opportunities are a federal provincial equivalency agreement. So in April of 24, the equivalency agreement is up, and we're currently in the process of renegotiating that to ensure that we have a certainty with respect to how we are moving forward with respect to reduction of emissions and how we are planning on hardening all of our assets against extreme weather risks. Medium-term risks, again, those continue to be environmental regulations, in particular the clean electricity regulations and the path that they'll lay out for us, and I've already covered off what those risks look like. The opportunities are to move baseload power sources to natural gas, and this is really our transition from coal to natural gas on our path to other non-emitting baseload technologies. We've talked about nuclear, hydro, carbon capture and natural gas. And so that's the medium-term mitigation to that medium-term risk. And then the long-term is that there's potentially more stringent natural gas regulations that are emerging from the federal government or future federal carbon taxes. We only have certainty out to the 2030 and the $170 a ton. And so the question is, what if it's $240 or $280 a ton? And so really the opportunity there is to grow renewables and other clean generation options to mitigate against that particular risk. Does that answer your question?
Good there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Having reached our agreed-upon time for consideration of Sask Power estimates today, we will adjourn consideration of these estimates. Mr. Minister, did you have any closing comments?
Yeah, very briefly. Knowing the time, I just want to thank the committee and Ms. Young for your questions. As well, I do want to thank the officials that are here this evening and have provided not just a great deal of support this evening, but in all the days that lead up to this, and to the thousands of employees that they represent that do a great job each day and day out on behalf of the people of this province. I will just say this will be my last Sask Power estimates as minister, assuming you don't call us back for another hour or something. But I would just say that it has been an absolute honor and privilege to be the minister responsible for Sask Power on 2 occasions now, and I consider it one of the greatest honors that I've had over the last 18 years. And I thank the women and men of Sask Power who have made that possible. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. Young?
God, I hate speaking after that, but I'd echo my thanks and appreciation to yourself, Mr. Chair, to the committee members, to the minister, to the officials present, as well as everyone at Sask Power who spent their time, their energy, and anxiety in preparing for tonight and ensuring that the utility does their best to remain on track. And also to you, Minister, it's what a cool portfolio and what a remarkable opportunity you've had to serve in this role, and I appreciate that. So my congratulations.
Thanks very much to all members, and I must say thank you for your cordial and professional decorum today. I recently sat through a federal House of Commons committee, and there was more point of orders and all of that. So I think getting down to business and doing it in a professional and courteous way is a great way to do it. That concludes our business for today. I would ask a member to move a motion of adjournment. Mr. Scorpad has moved. All agreed? Carried. This committee stands adjourned until Wednesday, April 17th at 3:30 p.m. Thank you.